Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV. We are lifelong Catholics, and what we do here is all for free, in love with Jesus Christ, and the most holy Trinity in His holy church, and will defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Our work is to true sense of apostolate. Any funds raised goes back into this work for equipment. This helps us to give you an unbiased, hard-hitting truth that is not controlled by political correctness or interest groups. Today's topic is when Doc Holliday meets Wyatt Earp and goes into Dodge City. And we welcome Brother Alexis Bonango to the show.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on Order Militaris Radio TV. It's always a pleasure to be on this new Catholic internet apostolate, uncontrolled media, and to continue our conversation about Doc Holliday. Now, let's see, our first program we did his childhood, then we did his youth, and up to the point he went to medical school. We did his time at medical school, and we left him off at a gambling house outside of Houston. And he had good practice there in Houston, and then he had his tuberculosis, so he began to drink and gamble.
Mm-hmm.
And what becomes of him? Does he stay in that little town there on the Oklahoma border?
Let's see here. Get this thing all around here. I just watch it, folks. Knowing these books, you're doing a show. Things don't show up. Okay, he was still in Fort Griffin, Texas. In fact, Wyatt Earp claimed that he first met Doc Holliday there in the winter of 1877 and 1878. Earp did have an altercation at Fort Worth Saloon in January 1878, and before the month was out, the Dodge City, Kansas papers were reporting him at Fort Clark, so he could have met Holliday at Fort Griffin on his way to Fort Clark, as he claimed, although Kate's chronology makes it possible that they met at Fort Clark. Earp may have remained at Fort Griffin nearly a month before moving on to Clark. However, at some point in time, at one place or another, he and Doc met, and they talked at length about Dodge City. Doc asked questions and seemed genuinely interested in what Earp had to say.
Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, because some people, they know who Doc Holliday is. We're doing shows, but tell everyone something about Wyatt Earp. Wyatt Earp is famous, but who is Wyatt Earp? Just generally, for people who don't know.
Well, he was, he grew up in a big, I believe in a good-sized family.
And he was from the East, or was he from the West?
Okay, he was from Illinois. He was born Wyatt Berry Sapp Earp.
Wyatt Berry Sapp Earp? Are you serious?
Mm-hmm.
Berry, Berry Sapp, S-A-P?
Mm-hmm.
I can see why he didn't use his middle names.
And he had Virgil, his one brother, Morgan, his other brother, and his other brother, Warren. His older brothers went and fought in the Civil War. Wyatt was 16 when his brothers came back after the Civil War, and they went off to Wyatt went into began going into the plains of Kansas and Texas and Oklahoma to hunt buffalo. He became a buffalo hunter, and so when he hunted buffalo, he was in charge of prepping it for the trains to be sent to the meat lockers and everything. And one of his jobs was to skin those things. And the stories of the buffalo hunters is when you skin a buffalo, they have the most god awful smell. And so, so in one of his hunting trips, he's probably down in now when he goes down into Texas, he's already a lawman in Kansas, and he's looking for this one horse thief, Dave Rudabaugh, and takes him into this area of Texas. And my thinking when he became a lawman in Kansas was to get out of that nasty work of buffalo skinning.
And why Earp and Doc Holliday end up our story ends at the OK Corral where they're fighting side by side. So why Earp, was he known to be an excellent shot?
Yeah, but he never actually used his pistol like the movies show him. He was always he never hardly had to fire his pistol. He either talked the bad guys down, or he used his fists and knocked them out and put him into the jails.
A tough guy. Was his preferred weapon the pistol or the rifle, since he was a buffalo hunter?
He liked his rifle, but he got to know and like his pistol a lot.
So when he meets up with Doc Holliday, is it just they cross paths, or does he recruit him to work with him?
Let's see. So when he meets Doc Holliday, someone introduces him because he's needing to know where this horse thief guy is, and he spends a lot of time in the spoons and the gambling houses. So they point him in the direction of Doc Holliday, like that frail, skinny young guy over there from Georgia. He'll tell you where you need to find him.
Okay. And does Holliday help Wyatt Earp?
Yeah. Then, yeah, as this book on Doc Holliday says, Wyatt tells him all about Dodge City and gets his interest up, and so he goes into and he leaves the part of Fort Griffin to Dodge City.
And what attracts Doc Holliday to Dodge City? Law work or just the gambling houses they have there?
It was it says in his autobiography that he doesn't really get into much trouble in Dodge, but I could tell you about the history of Dodge City.
Okay, yeah. Tell us a little bit about Dodge City. Okay, so Dodge City, most people, when I was growing up, I thought Dodge City was in like Arizona, New Mexico. So where is Dodge City? Let's set everyone the east straight who doesn't know where this town is.
It's down south in southwest Kansas, about it's about maybe a 3-hour car drive from where I am.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this you do not hear in Kansas history about the founding of Dodge City.
Yeah, okay. Tell us about the founding, and maybe you can tell us why it's called Dodge. That's a strange name.
With the railroad tracks pushing west through Kansas, two liquor dealers saw a chance to turn a quick profit by building a little tent store near the Arkansas River, out in the midst of buffalo country, to provide drinks for both the railroadmen and the hunters. The village in the southwest corner of Kansas boomed quickly. developing to a center for buffalo hunters by 1872. With the cattle trade moving west as settlers filled the land around the other cow towns, Dodge City emerged by the mid-1870s as the new site of a cattle commerce. A collection of wooden saloon stores and houses sprouted on the gentle bluff that rose above the Arkansas River, looking out on a seemingly unending expanse of buffalo grass spreading in all directions. The town had been established by liquor dealers, saloon owners, and whiskey merchants controlled in the politics. Texas drovers could find just about any pleasure they could imagine in Dodge, from enough cheap liquor to keep up a two-a-day drunk to cheap women ready to entertain them. Almost immediately, probably inevitable, Dodge fell into political factionalism. A group called the Gang seemed to dominate local politics and controlled most of the early elections. Bob Wright, a hotel and dry goods store owner, acted as a political power who rarely chose to intercede but carried authority when he did. The day-to-day runnings of local politics fell to James H. Kelly, nicknamed Dog for the band of racing greyhounds he owned. The Irish immigrant had served with the Confederacy during the war and fought Indians with Custer for arriving in Kansas. He presented an unkept appearance, wearing a handlebar mustache over his receding chin. An often ratty top hat was his usual choice of headgear. Kelly and his partner, Peter L. Beatty, ran the Alhambra Saloon, one of the most popular dens in Dodge. Liquor dealer George Hoover led the political opposition, which carried no title and drew support of the growing German population that had settled around Dodge and began farming sparsely settled Ford County. 300-pound Larry Deeger, the son of a German immigrant, stood as one of the leaders of the community and held some political strength.
He held some corporal strength to it that way. Okay, so Dodge City. Does Doc write his cousin Marie Matty about his time in Kansas? Do we know something what he might have told his cousin? And Matty Matty's the Catholic cousin, right?
Mm-hmm. But they say he probably had relations with, but it was never proven.
Let us say he might have had a crush on her.
Yep. But she becomes a nun that always writes him and always a thorn in his side.
Keep him on the straight and narrow. So what does he tell her about Kansas?
John Henry Holiday never looked back. He was through with Texas. He wrote to Mattie Holiday back in Georgia that he enjoyed about as much of this Texas as it could stand. Doc had heard about Kansas cattle towns often enough. Told all the way that drunk drovers told everything at poker tables and faro banks. But there was enough truth in their bragging and yarn telling to intrigue a man like Doc. He might have talked about Kansas, and especially Dodge City, with Charles Rath, the former Dodge City
Entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. Who now had a base of operations in Fort Griffin, or with Henry M. Beverly, the Texas agent of Wright, Beverly and Company, which had taken over vast business in Dodge. Doubtless too, he had talked about Dodge with White Earp, and the bottom line was there was money to be made there. So all that you had in a letter to his cousin. So.
Now, when Doc actually arrives in Dodge City, what does he find? What's the reality he finds?
Only weeks before Doc arrived, Edward J. Masterson, the town marshal, had been murdered in the line of duty. Charles E. Bassett, a veteran officer and past sheriff, whom one old-timer described as a pretty good man, too better than his associates, was appointed to replace him Ed's brother Bat Masterson was the sheriff of Ford County and was making a reputation for himself as the bane of horse thieves. On May 12th, the Dodge City Times reported Wyatt Earp returned from Texas. It predicted that he would be rehired. 3 days after that, the Ford County Globe confirmed his prediction. Wyatt Earp was one of the most efficient officers Dodge ever had, has just returned from Fort Worth, Texas. He was immediately appointed assistant marshal by our city dads, much to their credit. In fact, the Times seemed pleased with the entire police force, noting, Dodge City is practically under an efficient guard. The city fathers have wisely provided for the honor, safety, and character of the city by the appointment of the excellent police force. We believe no better men for the position can be found anywhere. The city guardians are named as follows: Marshal C. E. Bassett, Assistant Marshal Wyatt Earp, Policeman John Brown, and Charles Trask. Later in the summer, Charles Trask was replaced by Jim Masterson, and Dodge was ready for the cowboy invasion. Doc arrived as the town was preening itself for the cattle season. The Dodge City Times told the story. This cattle village in far-famed Wicked City is decked out in gorgeous attire in preparation for the Longhorn. Like the sweet harbinger of spring, the boot-black came, he of white and he of black, next the bar with its lather and shade. Two with all that go to make up the busy throng of life's faithful fever. Come the merry Magdalens, selling their souls to whoever will buy. There is high, low, jack in the game, all adding to the great expectation so important an event brings about. The merchants and the hardware dealers has filled his store and renovated his palace. There are goods in profusion in warehouse and on shelves. The best markets are sought, and goods are in store and to arrive. Necessary there is a great ado, for soon the vast plains will be covered with the Longhorn, and the wicked city is source from which the great army of herders and drovers is fed. The season promised to be a remarkable one. The drive is reported to be large, and the drive is to be reported large, and the first herd will probably reach this point within a couple of weeks. There has been no undue preparation, and the earlier season has stimulated activity to the greatest measure of expectations.
So it was a town who lived on the cowboys coming to town and spending their money. Now, when Doc arrives, does he become a gambler, or does he set up a practice as a dentist?
See. When Doc arrives, Doc rented a room at Dodge's house and was soon immersed in his new world. He wired his old colleague in Dallas, John A. Seeger, and had him ship the dental chair he had left behind in Texas. When the chair arrived in June, Doc posted the following notice in the Dodge City Times. Dentistry, John H. Holliday, dentist, very respectable, offers his professional services to the citizens of Dodge City and the surrounding county during the summer. Office at room number 24, Dodge House, where satisfaction is not given, money will be refunded. Now, I'm going to see if this photo of the Dodge House can show here.
And the Dodge House is the name of a hotel?
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess it still stands, or?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the towns they keep.
It's good to see that Doc got back into dentistry after his spin at gambling and saloons. And so how many years was he there as a dentist, and how did the city change while he was there?
Yeah. Holiday apparently behaved himself in Dodge City because his name did not show up either in the press or in the police court records. What survived are anecdotes that have an apocryphal feel about them. Perhaps the most interesting story is the one told by Robert M. Wright, a prominent Dodge City pioneer, businessman, and political leader. It is particularly compelling because Wright mentions Wyatt Earp only briefly in Dodge City, the cowboy capital, then misspelled his last name to be Erb, E-R-B. Wright's account, if true, would almost have to have happened shortly after Doc's arrival in town, in light of his later association with a man called Turkey Creek Jack Johnson. The stories the story is all more intriguing because of the reference to a male companion known only as Creek. Wright claimed to have first made their acquaintance when two gentlemen, elegantly dressed and groomed, made their appearance at the Long Branch Saloon. One could see at a glance that they were educated and refined. Both men had lovely manners and exceeding great persuasive powers. They were quiet and unassuming, but both were liberal spenders as well as drinkers, but they never under the influence of liquor. It was only a short time until they had captivated a lot of friends, and I among the number. Now this story. Now they go to the bank in town.
Mm-hmm.
Doc and Creek allegedly convinced the banker that they were the last members of a gang that had stolen gold bullion bars in stage robberies between the Black Hills and Cheyenne, and offered to sell the banker the gold bricks for $20,000. After they convinced the banker that the bricks were real, he gave them $20,000, but insisted that one of them go with him to Chicago as surety. While he arranged for transportation of the gold, Creek was designated hostage. En route, however, a man claiming to be an officer of the law arrested both the banker and Creek while in custody. Creek suggested that the banker attempt to buy off the marshal. The marshal, following a proper show of righteous indignation, did offer to let the banker go for a payment of $15,000. It is needlessly to say that the United States Marshal was no one else but Doc Holliday, said Wright. Later they returned to Dodge for a time, were heading south in style. They were sports, every inch of them. If they were crooks, and both dead shots with their six-shooters.
So this is an anecdote that they were involved in a swindle, but do we have any evidence that they
No.
were? Okay. Maybe it's more of a comment on how good talkers they were. They could talk anyone and think. It'd be hard to convince a banker that a brick which is not gold is gold.
Mm-hmm.
But banks were unregulated back then, so. Now, Doc ends up indebted to Wyatt Earp, did he? For something very important? And what was it? And how did it happen?
There. Okay. Wyatt Earp was standing outside leaning against an awning post when the shooting began, and he immediately began to fire after the cowboys, as did James Masterson and several citizens who joined the fray. Near the bridge, Joy Hoy fell from his horse, wounded in the arm. Hoy was a likable young man, although a fugitive from Texas for cattle theft. The marvelous part of the whole affair, Hoy remembered, was that aside from a few harmless scratches and some perforated clothing, nobody in the dance hall was hurt. Hoy was not so lucky. He died on August 21st of complications from his wound, attended to the end by his companions, Day and French boys. No charges was ever filed against any of the cowboys involved. By the time of the Hoy shooting, Doc and Wyatt had become friends. Doc also deepened his sense of belonging with the gambling and saloon crowd. William H. Harris, Chalky Beeson, Bat Masterson, and their associates accepted him in a way he had never known in Dallas, Fort Griffin, Denver, or any other place he had traveled. And let's see here. His association with Earp was about to become closer. Earp would later state that the reason succinctly, I'm a friend of Doc Holliday because when I was city marshal of Dodge City, Kansas, he came to my rescue and saved my life when I was surrounded by desperados. In a more dramatic statement, ghostwritten for him, Earp said that Doc saw a man draw on me behind my back. And Doc said, "Look out, Wyatt!" He shouted, but while the words were coming out of his mouth, he had jerked his pistol out of his pocket and shot the other fellow before the latter could fire. Unfortunately, the local papers did not record Holliday's intervention. Stuart N. Lake, the author of somewhat fanciful biography of Wyatt Earp, Frontier Marshal, placed the episode in September 1878. He also claimed that the incident in question involved the ranchers Tobe Driscoll, Ed Morrison. According to Lake, Earp met the Driscoll Morrison crew on Front Street near the Long Branch. They were closing around Earp when Holiday stepped out of the Long Branch with a string of expletives in order for the cowboys to throw up their hands. There were times when Doc Holliday swore beautifully, Lake quoted Earp as saying, according to this version, Doc's intervention gave Earp time to draw his own guns. So when the Cowboys made a play and Doc shouted the warning to Wyatt while stimulously shooting the drover in the shoulder. There's another version that is more directly attributed to Wyatt Earp that states, it happened that Doc Holliday was seated at a Monte table and glancing through the window. He appraised the situation in an instant. Turning to Frank Loving, the dealer, he said, have you a six-shooter? He handed his gun over to Holliday, who sprang without hesitation to the doorway, into the sidewalk, and throwing both guns down on the crowd, he said, throw up your hands. This rather startled them and averted their attention. In an instant, I drawn my gun, and the rest of the crowd followed. They were confined in jail overnight and fined and released the following day. It was because of this episode that I became the friend of Doc Holliday ever after. This event happened at least at about 7 o'clock in the evening, late in August 1876. Oh,
Okay, I lost you for a moment there, AJ.
yeah, we both got kicked out.
Okay, you might want to. The last I heard you say was he was sitting at a Monte table.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we pick up from there.
Yeah.
And then we'll.
So I want to tell this. Monte Carlo table is a type of solitaire table. And so it was. So he was sitting at a Monte table, glancing through the window. He appraised the situation in an instant. Turning to Frank Loving, the dealer, he said, have you a six-shooter? He handed his gun over to Holliday, who sprang without hesitation through the doorway into the sidewalk, and throwing both guns on the crowd, said, throw up your hands. The rather startled them and averted their attention. In an instant I had drawn my gun, and the rest of the crowd followed. They were confined in jail overnight and fined and released the following day. It was because of this episode that I became the friend of Doc Holliday ever after. This event happened about 7 o'clock in the evening, late in August 1876.
Mm-hmm. This is the kind of character you see Doc Holliday depicted in recent films. Quick of mind, quick on reaction, knew exactly how to say something to confuse the simple-minded. Now, during this time Doc was at Dodge City, was his health getting better or was it getting worse?
It was getting worse. It starts to cool off pretty quick in the fall. So let's see. So just when Doc and Kate Elder left Dodge for points west is far from clear, although Kate suggested that it was late November or early December. The decision to move was based on several things. First, on August 6, 1878, the town council had passed ordinance outlawing gambling and prostitution. In fact, the true purpose of the ordinance was to regulate gambling and prostitution through fines and not to eliminate either, while giving authorities the ability to get rid of undesirables. Nevertheless, it did increase the cost of gambling, even for the favored ones. More practically, gambling opportunities declined once the cattle season was over. Second, Doc would later claim that he had left because he was falsely accused of burglary. On December 11, 1878, an attempt was made to burglarize Jacob Collar's store. Although no connection to Doc is implied in news accounts, a different story claimed that in Dodge, Doc had made an acquaintance of Charles Wright, who ran crooked faro games, commonly called brace games, in Chicago, and had a shady reputation in Dodge. Wright, a Canadian-born gambler and saloonman, was related to the Dodge City businessman and town father Robert M. Wright. When the money went missing from Wright in Beverly's store, Charles Wright was suspected, but he accused Doc of taking the money. Robert believed Charles' story and blamed Doc. Doc could not buck a man as important as Robert Wright, so he left the town rather than face further trouble. This incident was said to have increased tension between Robert Wright and Wyatt Earp, who resented the accusation against his friend.
1878 in December, is that when he leaves, or do he leaves the month following?
It's either December or November.
And so one reason is his health, to get better air, warmer and drier air. Okay.
Yeah.
And so where does he go? Where does Doc Holliday head out to?
The most critical reason for Doc's move, however, was his health. Kate later claimed that she and Doc left Dodge for Las Vegas, New Mexico, to take advantage of the famous Montezuma hot springs near the town that had already becoming a mecca of consumptives. Clearly, Candace had not been kind to Doc. Bat Maston recalled that it was easily seen that he was not a healthy man, for he not only looked the part, but increasingly coughed it as well. None of the Texas recollections of him, and they are sparse, made any real point of his poor health. Masterson's comments in Kate's recollection suggest that Doc was moving into the second phase of consumption in the inhospitable climate of Kansas. His voice began to develop a deep hoarseness and result of throat ulcers that would repeatedly make it difficult for him to speak above a whisper or to eat. His cough became more severe, constant, and debilitating, produced a thick, dark mucus of greenish hue with yellow streaks and laced with pus. The cough attended by hectic fever that rose and fell with an accelerating pulse rate. The fever contributed to a ruddy complexion that seemed deceptively healthy yet alternate with a death-like paleness. Even so, most doctors were reluctant to confirm the diagnosis of consumption, because the same symptoms might appear with problems like bronchitis. Even in the second phase, the symptoms could become more severe and then alike. And it even got worse because it began to snow in Dodge City. And they were taking a train into Colorado to so they can get into New Mexico quicker, but the weather forced them to stay over in Trinidad, Colorado for about 10 days until they get the tracks cleared to go to New Mexico.
So on the southern border there of Colorado, the pass that goes through Raton, New Mexico, that part there. And where does Doc eventually go up? at least how much are we going to follow him in his travels in this program?
So once he gets into New Mexico, he into Las Vegas that December. Doc settled in Montezuma Hot Springs in Galenas Canyon, a few miles northwest of the town's plaza. An army hospital had been built there during the Mexican War. It was later abandoned, and Dr. Oscar H. Woodworth reportedly established the first private spa there in 1864. Next, W. Scott Moore took over and renovated the abandoned hospital as an old adobe house. When a doctor arrived, he likely stayed there with several other consumptives drawn from across the country to take treatments in the sulphurous waters. When not resting in the steaming pools, he practiced dentistry at the adobe house. Once his tuberculosis seemed under control again and weather permitted, Doc and Kate moved into quarters on the plaza in Las Vegas. Las Vegas was the destination of the Atchison-Topeka-Santa Fe Railroad, but in the winter of 1878 and 1879, it was still some distance and months away. Las Vegas was a stable, well-established community. Doc and Kate wintered there in what was perhaps the quietest environment they had known in years.
So we're not sure when Kate came back in his life. Was it at Dodge City or in Texas? Just that she appears in the record here once he leaves Dodge. So.
Yep. So then later he opened up office near the plaza in a building that also housed a tubercular young jeweler named William Leonard, who would play a significant role in Doc's life. Both of them were young, both were consumptives, and both specialized in gold work, albeit for different purposes. They had, however, respect for each other's skills. Leonard already had something of a reputation of an unsavory character and a gun hand. In September 1878, he had shot a man named Josie Maras in front of Littlefield's store and was pounded severely by Maras' friends, but Doc was used to such company. They had much in common and were soon friends. In March 1879, a local grand jury returned indictments against Leonard in the Mars case, but Leonard skipped town rather than face the charges. The climate in the springs revived John Henry physically. He was soon playing his trade as a gambler in Las Vegas saloons. Unfortunately, the territorial legislature passed a law against gambling that winter, and on March 8, 1879, about the time that Leonard took off, Doc was fined $25 because he did keep a gambling table called Monte. He may have used this as an excuse to leave because he left before paying the fine, and paper was issued ordering the collection of fine by August. He headed north toward the end of the tracks for the railroad being built in New Mexico. We had caught the train to Dodge City without Kate. He may have been included in this notice from Ford County Globe of March 23rd. A fresh invoice of gamblers arrived last Monday. Foy and Thompson are back in Kamik. Once back in Dodge, Doc assisted Batmaster in the organization of a group of fighters for Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad.
Mm-hmm. And that finishes this chapter. The next section of his life will be will it be the last section? Are we that close to the shootout at the OK Corral, or do we have more to say about Doc in the next episode?
Be when he goes to Tombstone, Arizona, and the events in this is massive because it's like a retelling of actual calendar events of what happened
in the Lincoln County War.
In Tombstone, which leads up to the shootout and everything.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, but in the next section of the show, it's going to get a lot more exciting because it has a lot more action
Though what we've heard in today's program reminds you so much of what you've seen in the films. The Wild West. This is why for those who aren't familiar with American history, this is why it's called the Wild West, because you had all these boom towns, settlers arriving, and there was pretty little law and order, and not all of it was lawful or order. And you could just skip out of town without paying a fine, or people flowed from one place to the other. This is the American character not really having any roots, and Europeans would call it like a gypsy life. And since no one was born out there, they just changed one town to another whenever they had the slightest problem. And that character, except if you're not if you're not from the farming stock out west, that character still prevails. I've met some people from the Midwest, and it's like they've lived in dozens of towns over their life. They move from one to another. They lose a job in one, move to another. Always over the horizon is a new land of opportunity, a hope where you can reinvent yourself and no one knows who you are. That's the West. It's different than many parts of the world. And does that lifestyle still exist, AJ, or have Kansans settled down and become more quiet country folk?
There's still some that, you know, raise up and let's say leave for college. They're just gone, but most of the time it's just they stick around and raise their family here, and that's it. And we lost Brother Alexis. So let's see if he comes back.
Okay, now I got you back.
That's twice.
Yeah, it's twice. I don't know if it's on your end, but I've been having a lot of problems here with Zoom. I think it's Zoom itself. Yesterday, I had horrible problems with Zoom, and even some problems today. But I was going to say it was interesting in your discussion of what was going on in Dodge City, that the Irish founded the town and basically controlled the liquor and gambling, but the honest folk moving in were the Germans, and they're getting involved in farming. And that touches upon why the whole Midwest, Kansas, Nebraska, especially South Dakota, have so many Germans in the countryside or farmers. And that's where your own stock came from, right? Isn't the Bauman? When did the Bauman family come to Kansas? Do you know?
1880s, 1890s.
Okay, as farmers.
Yeah.
Okay, so just about this time that we're talking about, just as the buffalo hunting was fading out and a more stable life was coming in. With the railroads, you could send your crops to market, so it really opened up the whole West. And the invention of the steel plow, because the prairie grass was really hard to plow until they could break it with a steel plow. So thank you for inviting me to host this. This is our third third or fourth on Doc Holliday. I've lost track. I think it's our fourth. Yes. And so Doc Holliday, and the amazing thing of all these adventures is that his cousin prevails on him, and he dies a Catholic. So this is the adventure of Doc Holliday's voice. Someday they got to really make the whole life of Doc Holliday as a film, and it would be a great American story and a great story for the Catholic faith.
Yep. Or Zoom cuts us out again. And this is Lord Militarist Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.